In today's episode, we're going to go back to the beginning of our Decoded Quick Hits series, that is. In our very first episode, we talked about how you could integrate data from MongoDB into your OutSystems apps using a Forge component. And now it's time to revisit that integration. Find out what's new, coming right up. The first episode of Decoded Quick Hits, recorded nearly 2 years ago, showed how you could use a Forge component to bring data from a MongoDB NoSQL database into your OutSystems app and write data to that database as well. Meanwhile, a newer part of the OutSystems platform called Integration Builder has been adding more and more integrations, including recently added support for MongoDB. If you haven't used or seen Integration Builder, check out this video from our series which introduces Integration Builder. Integration Builder focuses on reducing the effort required to set up integrations in your apps, and as of this recording, supports Salesforce, SAP OData, Microsoft Dataverse and Dynamics 365, SharePoint Online, and a variety of external databases, including DB2 iSeries, PostgreSQL, and Aurora PostgreSQL, MySQL, Oracle, and Azure SQL and SQL Server, as well as MongoDB, which we'll be discussing today. You can find detailed documentation on using Integration Builder at the link above. I'll also post it in the description below. With all that said, let's take a look at a demo. So we're going to start our demo by looking at the sample data that we're going to work with. So MongoDB offers a series of sample databases that you can integrate into your applications or into your MongoDB database. I'm using MongoDB Atlas. I'm using MongoDB Compass, which is a desktop tool that you can use to explore your databases. So we're taking a look at the movies collection in the sample_mflix database. I'll include a link to where you can install the sample databases as well as a link to MongoDB Compass. But basically what this allows me to do is look at the documents in the movies collection and see what the data looks like before I start integrating that into my OutSystems application. I can also go to the website in MongoDB Atlas to discover how to connect to my database, but connecting is actually going to be really easy. The only thing I'm really going to need to have for Integration Builder is the connection string, and we'll see kind of what that looks like as we move forward. Now I'm going to switch over to Integration Builder, and when you get started with Integration Builder, you're going to need to select the environment that you want to connect to. If I don't already have an environment set up, I can just simply type the environment into the environment box here, or if I've connected to another environment, I can select that environment from the drop-down and then click the Next button. You can also click the link here to see more about Integration Builder. Now it's going to prompt me for the username and password for my account. I'll fill those in and click the Login button. You'll see we get an onboarding screen. I can click through to learn more about Integration Builder and then click Go to Integration Builder. And one of the things that you'll notice is because I'm starting from a personal edition where I haven't used Integration Builder before, I get prompted for some dependencies. So we'll go ahead and install those dependencies. And you can see that it tells me which things I need installed. So I need Integration Builder Utils, some common shared service, secret manager, and integration manager. So I'm going to go ahead and update those dependencies and integrations. One of the nice things here is that Integration Builder will help keep these up to date by prompting me when I log into Integration Builder whether I have the current version of all these dependencies. So if I don't have the current version, it will prompt me to update them. So we're going to wait for a couple minutes for this to go through. We'll kind of speed through this in the demo and come back when that's completed. All right, so now our dependencies and integrations are updated. We'll click the Back to the Homepage button, and now it's time to build our first integration. So we're going to click Create Integration, and then we want to choose a provider. So as I mentioned, you can see there's a great number of providers here for different external databases and services. I'm going to choose MongoDB. And then the next thing that I'm going to need to do is to create a connection to my MongoDB database. So again, I mentioned that I'm in MongoDB Atlas. So we'll first need to install the MongoDB plugin. That'll take just a second here. And it's important to note that these dependencies that we're installing, this is a one-time install. They can be updated later on, but once you've installed them, you don't need to install them again. And once the installation finishes, we'll click OK. And now we can create a connection to our MongoDB database. So you can see we've got the name of the connection, which we can update. We can provide a description. We can choose username and password for authentication or no authentication. I strongly recommend that you stick with username and password. Fill in the username and password, the host name, that is how do we connect to the database. That can include just the URL or it might include a port. I'm using MongoDB Atlas, so I'm going to check the MongoDB Atlas checkbox here. And then the database that we want to connect to. So I know I want to connect to sample_mflix. And we're going to use TLS/SSL, so we have encrypted communications. And we're going to leave the retry rights equals true. And so our connection string is going to end up looking something like this, although I haven't filled in all the information. So let me fill in the rest of the information and we'll move forward. All right, now I've filled that in. We'll go down to the test connection button and test to make sure our connection works. And it does, so that works successfully. Now we can click Create Connection and get that connection created. And we'll select our MongoDB connection and click Next. And now we can move forward with our MongoDB integration. Now, because we chose the sample mflix database, it's going to show us all of the collections that are available in that database. If I select the movies collection, you can see the data that's available in the movies collection. I'll go ahead and check that collection and say I want to use that. And I've got two options in terms of the format that I bring back from the integration. So I can choose structure, and structure basically allows Integration Builder to take the native format of the database, which is JSON, and wrap that in OutSystems structures. So OutSystems will create the structures on my behalf. So that simplifies the process of accessing this data. I can also switch to JSON, which is just going to bring the movie data over in JSON format, and then I'm responsible for how I bring that data into my UI, into my logic, etc. I could wrap those in structures myself, build the structures by hand. I could also just choose to deserialize or serialize that JSON into various objects in other ways. So it's really up to me. So if you want the most control, you can use JSON. The easiest way is to use structure, which is what I'm going to use here. And you also have the option of making the data read only. So if you only want to access data for display, you don't want to update or change that data, you can check this checkbox. I'm going to leave this as is. Now, when you go to build this integration, the structures in the case of a structure format are going to be based on a sample of the documents in that collection. So you can see these are the fields that Integration Builder has interrogated some of the documents and figured out these are the fields that I see in the most recent 5 documents. For a large sample set or a large database, like the movies database has, I think, 20 some odd thousand records, most recent 5 might not necessarily be the way to go. So you might want to say, I want to choose an evenly spread sample, and maybe we want to do more like, let's try 20 documents across the entire collection, and I'll click Update Structure, and it's going to go and look and might find some additional fields. For example, Metacritic wasn't there before, and those fields might be important to me. So I've identified some additional fields that might be useful for me to use. Now, I might not need all of these fields. So I might say, for example, I really don't care in this instance about IMDb. Maybe I don't care about the tomatoes. So I'm going to uncheck some of these things that I'm not that interested in, and that will simplify the data that I'm bringing back into my OutSystems application. So once I'm satisfied with how I've decided to bring that data in, I'll click the Next button, and then I can look at maybe the app name. Maybe I might want to change this since I'm doing movies. I might want to call this the MongoDB Movies Connector. My integration module is MongoDB_IS, and the driver module, I can change those if I want, but the documentation does refer to these names, so it's probably good to leave them unless you really need to change them. I also have the ability to edit this connection, and I can say I want to come back to Integration Builder if I want to edit this, or I can say I want to use Service Studio to edit this. I'm going to leave it as is. I've got my username and host name, I've got my sample database, and then I've got one collection that I've set up here. I can have obviously more than one collection if I want, but I've just chosen one for simplicity. Now it's time to publish. This is going to go through and make sure all the dependencies are in place. It's going to generate the modules necessary and then deploy the application to my personal environment. All right, now our integration is ready to go. And as we look at the landing screen, what this is telling us is that our app name that we just created is MongoDB Movies Connector. It has several modules, including the MongoDB IS integration service module. And this is the module we're going to consume in our OutSystems application. So we'll take a look at that in just a second. So it tells us what the assigned connection is, other modules that may be important to us, and it even gives us brief instructions on how to use this integration. So we want to go into the dependencies, and we want to select the MongoDB IS module and select all of its actions. So we'll take a look at that again in just a second. So now we're in Service Studio, the OutSystems IDE, and I've got the various dependencies showing up in my application list. I'm going to go to New Application, and I want to select From Scratch. and click Next. I'm going to create a reactive web app, and I'm just going to call this Movies App, and click Create App, and then click Create Module. And now I'm ready to develop my app. So the first thing I want to do, as noted in the instructions, is go to Manage Dependencies on the toolbar. And I'm just going to search here for Mongo and find my MongoDB IS module. And I'm just going to check the checkbox at the top. This gives me a series of actions that allows me to query my database to get the documents related to movies. So I'll go ahead and click Apply. And now we're ready to start working on our user interface. So I'm going to right-click on my main flow here. The flow is what contains all of the screens that I'm going to be working with for my primary screens. I'm going to add a screen. I'm just going to use an empty screen, call it Movies, create that screen. I'm going to make it anonymous so I don't need to log in. And I'm going to set the title to Movies. And I'm going to go ahead and publish. I like to publish pretty frequently during my development experience because if I need to roll back any changes that I made, publishing frequently allows me to have multiple versions saved, so it's easy for me to find a point in time that I can roll back to if I make a mistake. And our publish is complete. We're not going to bother looking at this app quite yet because there's really nothing to look at. Now, let's go about getting some data. So if I right-click my Movies screen, one of the options that I have is called Fetch Data from Other Sources, and this allows me to get data from a server action from various places. I can also fetch data from the database, but since we're using an external database, fetch data from other sources is what I want to use. So I'll select that. I'm going to change my data action to get movies, and then this is going to automatically have an output parameter, and I'm going to change this to be named Movies. Now you notice the data type, when I change that name, switches to Movies. Now I'll show you this in just a second, but I don't want just movies. I want a list of movies. So I'm going to scroll down in the drop down. I'm going to select List and Movies. So now I have a movies list is what's going to come back from this get movies, fetch data from other sources. Now the magic that happened when I clicked movies is because my integration automatically created structures for the data that I'm coming back. So if you see the MongoDB driver and I go to movies, you can see I have a number of structures that were automatically created from the document information that I selected inside of Integration Builder. So that simplifies my development process significantly. So let's go back to our interface tab. We're still in our get movies, fetch data from other sources. Now I'm going to flip over to the logic tab, and inside this integration with external systems, which represents Integration Builder, you can see I now have this MongoDB_IS, and here's my movies. And these are all of the actions that I can use, and I want search movies documents. So this is basically going to go and get all of the movies from my collection that match certain criteria, or if I really want to, I can get all of the movies, period. Now, when I drop the search movies documents action onto the flow, you can see that it gives me a bunch of options that I can have here. The first one that I really want to take care of is I want to limit my number of records to, I'm going to get the first 50 that come back. Now, the reason that I'm doing that is, again, I mentioned earlier, this movies database has in the collection of movies something, some 20,000 plus. That's a lot of data to bring back, so I really don't want to bring that all at once. So I'm going to grab 50 records, and I can add some filters if I want, but we'll come back to that a little bit later. The filters, the projection, these are all things that you can do to shape the data that's coming back, limit which data you want to get, etc. Now, the search movies documents is going to bring back a list of movies, so I'm going to use an assign widget, and I'm going to assign the movies output parameter to the search movies documents results. All right, so now we should have the data that we need. Let's flip back to our interface tab. We'll go to the movies screen, and I could just very easily grab this movies item, drag it over here, and create a tabular data format. That's pretty boring, so I don't want to do that. Let's go ahead and instead, we're going to build a gallery view using some of the UI widgets that OutSystems UI provides. So I'm going to run down a bit here and grab a gallery widget, drop it onto the screen. Now the gallery widget will by default include a default list that has some kind of sample items here. I'm just going to get rid of that list. So I'll just go ahead and select and delete that. So now I've got my gallery and a content area. I'm going to go back up to the top of the toolbox. I'm going to find the list widget, and I'm going to drag it onto the content area. And that list widget is showing in red because it needs to know where it's going to get the data. Now, You can see the property that it's looking for is source because that's also outlined in red. And if I click the dropdown, we get a helpful suggestion that maybe I should use the movies from my fetch data from other sources. Now the list widget is happy, but it doesn't know how to generate a UI. So I could go back into my elements and drag certain elements into the screen, but I'm going to take advantage of another UI helper in OutSystems UI called a card. And in this case, I want the card section. So I'm going to drag the card section onto my list, and you'll see that it's showing that it will create multiple of these. And the nice thing about the card section is that you can add the various parts of the UI that you want, and it prompts you which ones to use. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and grab an image and drag it into the top area. And you see the image is also in red here because it needs to know where it's going to get the image data. You can use local images, you can use binary data. I'm going to use external URL since that's how my data is structured, and that URL is going to be the poster field from the current movie. So we've got that. Now we can come through and we can say, of course, we're going to want the title. So we're going to put the title here, and maybe I want the title to be styled a little differently. So if I come over to styles, I can say, maybe I want the title to be a little bit bigger. So let's make that 24 pixels. And I come back and say, okay, maybe I want to know what the rating is on a given movie. So I'll drag that in there. And let's see, last but not least, we're going to want the year that the movie was released. So now we should have a basic UI for our movies. Should look pretty good so far. So let's click publish, and then we'll take a look at how this looks on screen. We'll click the open in browser. That'll open our movies application, and we can see already there's a couple of issues here. One, the poster size is kind of inconsistent, so I'm not very happy with that. Also, there seem to be some movies that just don't have a poster, and I think for my purposes, I'd like to just exclude those from our output. And then we've also got some pretty old movies, so maybe I might want to update the year to bring back some that are a little bit newer. Not new, but let's just say I want to filter out some of the oldest movies. So we'll jump back into Service Studio and let's do some of those fixes. So first thing, I want the images to be a little more consistent. So I'm going to click on the image and I'm going to go over to the Styles tab here, and let's just make these 200 pixels. So we're going to limit the height to 200 pixels and make those a little bit easier to look at. Then the next thing that I wanted to do was put a few filters on my movies. So when I go to search movies documents, I want to take advantage of the filtering ability. And one of the things that's cool that I like with MongoDB Compass is that you can use MongoDB Compass to test various filters for your data. So if I flip over to MongoDB Compass, you can see we've got this oldest movie, 1893, probably older than I want. And I'm going to use a query that I worked on a little bit earlier. So I'm setting the year to be filtered by greater than 1916, and I'm setting the poster field to make sure that that poster field actually exists in the document that I want to bring back. So if I click find, what we'll see is that our first movie is now from the year 1917, and our movies will all have the poster attribute URL. So now if I take this same query and I copy it and I bring it over to Service Studio, and I can paste that into the advanced filters, I do have to wrap that in quotes. That should get me the results that I want. So we've now filtered based on the year being greater than 1916 and the poster existing. So let's go ahead and publish this. And switching back to our application, we'll refresh the page. And we can see now that the changes that we've made have nicely improved our UI. We've got more consistent size in our posters. We've only got movies coming back that have poster URLs. We've got a couple of broken URLs, but we can still tweak and work on those. But I think we've really improved our movies UI greatly with just a few tweaks. Okay, so we've got a fairly nice gallery view for our movies, but what if we want to get details for the movies? Well, that's pretty simple to do too. So let's take a look in Service Studio. Going back to our movies screen, we can again see our gallery, and we can just right click on the title, and we're going to select link to new screen. We'll use an empty screen again, and we'll just call this movie detail and create the screen. We'll just call this movie details for simplicity. Now, obviously, if we want to get the data for a movie, we need to know how to get that data. So in our movie details, I'm going to add an input parameter, and I'm going to call this movie ID. And that'll just get passed in as text. Now, once I do that, if I go back to my movie screen, my link for getting to this screen is going to be in red. And the reason it's going to be in red is because it needs to know where to get that data. So I'm going to switch over to the properties, scroll down to movie ID, click the drop down, and select Get Movies, Movies, Current ID. So now that's happy. We can go back to our movie details and build the UI for this. So we're going to get that movie ID. And to get that, we're going to again fetch data from other sources, and we'll say get movie by ID, and it's going to again return not a list of movies, but a movie. Now I'm going to do a little trick here. I'm going to call it movies to get my structure, and then since I just want one movie, I'm going to remove the S, and it will retain that data type. Now to get my movie, I just need to go and grab the get movies document. So I'm going to get movies document, drag that on here, and it's going to want to know what the document ID is. So I can simply tell it that's going to be movie ID. Now that's good to go. And again, we'll want to assign the output parameter to the value returned from the action. So we're going to say our movie is get movies document, and we're good to go. So now we will have our data, switch back to our interface, and now we can build our UI. So I'm going to keep this fairly simple, but what I want in this case is a flip content widget. So I'm going to drag this in here. And for the flip content widget, you've got basically a container for the content for the front side and the back side. And when the user clicks the flip content widget, it will flip back and forth to show that. So again, expanding my movie, I'm going to want an image for my poster. So we'll go find the image widget. I'm going to drag this on the screen. I'm going to center it up on the screen. And again, I'm going to make this an external URL and set it to the poster property. And then in the styles, I'm going to make this 250 pixels, and we'll call that good. Now for the front, we're probably going to want the title. So we're going to add that. And in this case, we want to set our title to be the full width of the screen so that it drops below my image. And then the title I also want to be centered, which it is. And I'm going to again use the styles. I want the title to be nice and big. So let's make that 36 pixels. Let's make that bold. Probably pretty good separation there. So I like how we've got that. And now for the back, we're going to want to know the plot of the movie. It would be a good thing to have. So we're going to drop that into here. Again, I'm going to go ahead and center that up. And probably want to make that a little bit bigger so it's readable. Let's make that like 18 pixels, and then we'll add the year. Now again, because I want this to stack, I'm going to set this to the full width and do the same with our year. Probably a little easier to do this when it's left aligned first. There we go, set each of these to 12 columns. Now, I really don't want these stacked quite so tightly on top of one another, so I can just add a margin on top of my year. So I've got a little bit of breathing space there. I'll do the same with my plot, but probably only need about 10 pixels from the top of the card. So I'm going to set the year. Again, I'll make that bold, and we'll bump that up to, say, 16 pixels. All right, so now I've got my content for the front and the back. Let's go ahead and publish and see what this looks like. Go ahead and refresh our app. So now we can see that our titles are all links, and I can click the first link here and I get to see the poster and the title of the movie. If I click the poster and the title of the movie, I get the plot and the year of the movie. If I click again, it flips back to the front. And if I go back again, I can also see I get the same thing for my other movies. So just that quickly, we were able to implement a gallery view and a details view for all of our movies, pull all that data from MongoDB, and have a working application. So hopefully you can see that Integration Builder makes it easier than ever to get connected to an external database like MongoDB, and the same is true for the other integrations it supports. Next time you need to integrate one of these external sources, be sure to reach for Integration Builder to save yourself time and effort. If you liked this video, please give us a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click the bell icon to be among the first to know about each new episode of Decoded Quick Hits. And spread the word by sharing with your friends. The best way for us to help more OutSystems developers is to grow our channel, and we'd appreciate your help doing that. Thanks for watching.